In this video, I'm going to talk about importing data into TopBraid EDG. TopBraid EDG has many different ways of importing data, including importers for spreadsheets and XML. The technology that I'm going to use here is active data shapes, which is probably the most flexible approach for importing data, assuming you are somewhat familiar with a little bit of programming. So the task that we are looking at for this video is to import this little spreadsheet here. It's an Excel file which has 3 columns. The first one is for concepts. It contains labels for each concept, and the second column is an ID for each of the concepts. And finally, the third one is pointing at the ID of the parent. And those are supposed to be matched when the import happens. All right. The easiest way to experiment with using TopBraid EDG's active data shapes is through the script editor. The script editor window has a button here which allows you to upload a file. And once you've uploaded that file, you are able to access the content of that file. So for example, if it's a spreadsheet, you can convert it into an object which provides an API that you can then use to query the rows and columns and whatever of that spreadsheet. So the entry point into that is the function uploaded file in the class graph. And basically, the line that I've just typed in is always the same, and you just need to know how that works. Once you have done that, in this case, we have created a variable called s, which now points at the uploaded spreadsheet, which is this object here. But it does so using the API that we have defined. And for each uploaded spreadsheet, we can now query a number of things like, for example, how many rows does it have? And you can see the result here. It has 4 rows. Some other information we might be interested in: what are the names of the sheets? In this case, there is only one sheet in this Excel file. It's called sheet 1. And what are the name of the columns? And this is returning us an array with all those 3 column names. And of course, we want to know what are the values in each row. So we can use the function called row to fetch a JSON object with the row at a certain index. So let's say the content of the first row would be row 0. And this is the JavaScript object which is returned there. And we can now, for example, if we want to query the ID of this first row, we can just use this call. This one, or we can, for the label, we can use concept. Okay, so basically the row function delivers us a convenient JavaScript object for each row. So in the second row, for example, we have another field for the parent ID. In this case, it was 1. Okay, so using this API, we can now define a simple importer, which will convert each of the rows into an instance of SCOS concept. So we are fetching the array of all the rows, and then we say for each of those rows, we want to create a concept. Let's say concept equals, and now we can use one of the automatically generated classes in active data shapes. In this case, since we are in a SCOS context, we can just say SCOS create concept. And the create concept function takes basically a template object as its argument. In this template object, we can define the URI of the concept that we want to produce. And let's say we want the URI to be something like example.org concept and then the ID of the current row. Okay, so we can preview this now, and we can then look at the result. These are the triples that the script would produce if we were to run it for real. For now, we have just simulated it, and we can look at the results. We can even check constraint violations if there are some, and in this case, there are plenty. And we can then iterate, fine-tune our algorithm until we are happy with the output. So in this case, there were 4 rows in the spreadsheet, and you can see it has created one instance of SCOS concept for each of them, and the URIs of those are basically based on the first column in each row. Okay, so let's assume we also want to copy the pref label. This was stored in a field called, was it concept? Let's try that out. Here we go. Now it has also produced the pref label. Okay, so, and you can continue like this. So you can use the autocomplete of the editor to find which properties are available for your concept class. And if you, of course, if you're importing to some other class, then you would see different suggestions here. The third column that we were interested in was linking each newly created concept with its parent. And this was stored in a field called parent ID in the spreadsheet. So let's call it PID. And we say row. And now, because the parent ID has a space in it, we have to use this array syntax here in JavaScript to access the values. So now we can say, well, does this even have a value? Because in the root object, there is no value for it. Only if there is a value, then we want to assign the parent, basically. So we want to say, what is the broader concept of the new concept? And we want to create a URI node, which is a named node in the API. So you use graph named to produce an instance. You say its URI should be example.org/concept dash, and then we want to use the PID. And yeah, let's run that. Let's see what it does. So now there are much fewer constraint violations. We have fixed most of them because they are no longer orphans. So you now see it has produced, or it will produce, the broader triples pointing at the respective parent in each row. Okay, so, and let's say in case there is no parent ID, we probably want to make it the top concept under the selected concept scheme. So in the else case, we want to say that the currently selected node, which is called focus node as usual in active data shapes, focus node has top concept, which is the current one. Let's try that. And here we go. So no further constraint violations, and you can see for this currently selected example scheme, it will use the first root concept at the top. So our script is now ready to be executed for real. We can do that. And you will see the new instances are showing up. And they seem to have the correct values. Okay, so now obviously, if I have made all those efforts and defined this little script, I may want to share this with my friends and also make it reusable. So what I'm going to do is I'm turning this now into what's called a resource action. And resource actions are attached to classes in the ontology. So now I'm moving to the ontology that this taxonomy is based on. It's basically just a little extension of scores. So, and on the class concept scheme, so assuming you have activated showing all the properties, you will find resource actions at the bottom of the form for every class. In this case, we want to attach a resource action to the concept scheme class, and that action will then be available for every instance of concept scheme. So we say create resource action, and we want to make this an action that is allowed to make modifications to the data. And let's call it import spreadsheet. Now, in the definition of this, the most important bit is obviously the source code of the script. And we are just pasting in what we have used, what we have defined in the other window. And that's good enough. It does exactly the right thing. Then we can select in which group in the menu this action should show up. And this is actually a requirement for things to show up at all. We can also select an icon. In this case, I'm just selecting an icon which represents an Excel file. And most importantly here, to get this going, we need to define a parameter for the file upload, which will then ask the user to select a file. And this is traditionally called file, and we can add a description that will then be visible to the user. A spreadsheet to upload, and it's of type file, and in particular a spreadsheet. Okay, that should be it. So once we save the changes, this is now attached to the ontology, to the class concept scheme. So now if I refresh the taxonomy instances, I should now see this new action here. And in fact, I can close those windows here because they are only needed for development. Now, assuming I'm an end user, I can now call this import feature directly from the modify menu of the selected instance of concept scheme. Okay, and when I click on it, it will ask me to fill in all the arguments, all the parameters. In this case, it's only asking me to upload a spreadsheet. I'll use the same one. And now you can either preview the triples that are going to be inserted, or you can just run it, in which case you can basically get the same results, and you now have a reusable action for your end users. Similar techniques can be used for other file types, and the document that I am pointing at here is explaining how to do similar things for JSON files and XML files. Basically, we are offering an API for walking DOM trees in XML files, similar to how you could query the cells and rows of a spreadsheet in this other API. Thank you.